Thank you, David. I hope that pause was long enough. I just want to start, before I start, just say how great it is to be seeing you all's faces and being making a presentation and connecting with you all at Curl today. Fond memories of my time there, and I really think you guys have a wonderful shop. It was great to be a part of it. And also these Friday morning seminars. This space for this kind of dialogue is amazing, and I just remember some great conversations we had there and great people I met as I was still pretty new to Chicago at the time. So just want to acknowledge that the space that I'm in and show my appreciation for being here. It was great also because it was just Friday morning. Friday mornings are great. They're perfect for this kind of conversation. Generally we have less going on and people tend to be more relaxed. Uh, so it's great to be here. So I'm going to just share my screen and go through a presentation that I hope should take 20-25 minutes at most, maybe. If it goes a half hour, well, that's because I might ramble or go off topic. Um, And then just knowing the format, I know we'll have time for hopefully a robust discussion. I know there's a lot of interest in this topic. Um, and so hopefully my presentation really just frames a conversation that follows. So it's a nice graphic from our um, monitoring team here. I'm just trying to figure out how I can, there we go, move forward. So a little more about me. There's really three hats that are relevant to this talk. I guess I only wear two of these three hats at this time, but a third I was wearing at one point. So the first is kind of my day job. I'm director of the Institute for Policy and Civic Engagement at University of Illinois at Chicago. We're in the College of Urban Planning and Public Affairs, which works great for me. I'm an urban planner. That's what my PhD is in. Um, but I've been a planner, but involved in a broad range of different kinds of research and work. And again, that was one of the things I loved about being a part of Curl, was that interdisciplinarity, and brought that also to this role at UIC, where I've been since 2004, and in this job with this institute since 2008, and director since 2010. What does IPSI do? We really are, the short version of our mission is that we try to help make sure our democracy works better, works well for everyone. Um, right now, I feel like there's a lot of demand for that, but there was also a lot of demand when we started. It was just a completely different context. When we started in 2008, on the heels of the first Obama election, I think it was more about just sort of uh, being inspired to be engaged and remove barriers and get more folks involved and be more creative and use technology in new and innovative ways to enhance our democracy. And now that demand is really in the context of more of a threat to our democracy, right? That our divisiveness and well, I don't have to go into all that, but I think there's a collective sense that our democracy is imperiled in a lot of ways right now. We do our work through really three buckets of activity: research on civic engagement and who participates, methods of engagement. Um, you know, a lot of that is like, how do you, what kinds of meetings and meeting facilitation and stuff. But um, there's really also space for policy research that has engagement as a component of it. And so we do that, but we really more support that work through sharing our resources with our faculty. We have a competitive award that we give to faculty on UIC's campus to do civic engagement research work. The second bucket is what I would call public deliberation or dialogue and deliberation work. That is where we might be invited in or asked to help with a process, an engagement process. Sometimes it's related to a specific decision a public agency has to make, or a new plan, or something of that nature. Other times it might be a community initiative, or something around community building, or folks getting to know each other, or build bridges across difference. Um, and then the third bucket is what I call civic learning, democratic engagement. And one of the best examples of our work in that kind of broad catch-all is a leadership development program we run for historically underrepresented minorities. It's structured as a paid internship. Um, and we've been running that program since 2009, had over 300 students go through it, and a ton of different kinds of partnerships from that. So that's kind of the just quick overview of IPSI. We have a team of 7, include some research staff, and we always have an army of students. I learned well from my time at Curl and other centers I worked at. So you'll see a lot of similar kind of models in our activity. Uh, so that's my main hat. That hat really almost never comes off. So it's always there. A hat I wore related to this work in 2008 was when the Attorney General's office approached us when Lisa Madigan's office had filed a lawsuit in federal court to start the process that became the consent decree. There had been community engagement prior to that, which I'll talk about. The Department of Justice had done an investigation following the killing of Laquan McDonald and the release of that video, and had done some community engagement around that. But this was a whole process related specifically for input on the decree. And so we designed a process for that, which became 14 input sessions, community dialogues we had around the city between February and April of 2018. 1,000 or so Chicagoans participated, and we got 6,000 comments, and compiled and analyzed all of those and produced a report. But I'll say in real time, the Attorney General's attorneys were actually attending the ends of our meetings and taking notes off the sort of table notes poster paper we had posted on the wall at the end of our meetings, and literally taking that right into the negotiations they were doing around the decree at that time. Third hat, I'm currently a member of the independent monitoring team, which is the role that I'm going to talk about today. Once the decree was put into place, it was simultaneously a monitor was appointed by the court to track progress and evaluate that progress along the way. So that's I'm a member of that team. So I have kind of 3 goals for this presentation. This presentation is really sort of done in the 2 parts. There's the first part, which is sort of a typical, it's tweaked a little bit, but it's sort of standard kind of presentation we might give at a community meeting. And it wouldn't just be me, it would be others involved, because as you'll see, I'll get into this, this decree is a massive undertaking. But in that sort of tweaked presentation for today, one of the goals is to have a general understanding what a consent decree is, and specifically the Chicago Police Consent Decree, learn about the role of the independent monitor for the decree, and the role community engagement plays within the monitoring team. There's a lot of consent decrees out there on different topics, a lot of monitors and monitoring folks in place. But I might put out there that this structure with having quite the same capacity, I don't know that there's a process out there that has quite the same community engagement capacity built into it. And then finally here, a quick overview of results of a recent survey, which is also part of my role on the monitoring team, kind of a unique role related to my colleagues, of doing a survey of Chicagoans' perceptions and experiences with police every other year. And that's required by the decree. So first, what is a consent decree? Well, it's a I guess you could think of it as an order by a judge to a public agency or government, a body um, that that order that you have to do this, right? Judges have the authority to do that. Tell us what to do legally. And so the legal document that requires changes to the Chicago Police Department, that's the Chicago Police Consent Decree. Department policies and practices to improve safe and diligent service to all living in Chicago. Uh, Part of its goals to achieve an experience of fairness also in policing for all. In fact, that was what triggered the decree. And I also want to acknowledge it was brought about, the Attorney General's office, me, monitoring team, we're all late players to the game here. This decree, while the Attorney General filed this in court, it was really precipitated by amazing hard work of organizing and organizers and folks who had filed their own lawsuits and struggled and toiled for years with fighting for justice, basically. And so I'll talk about how those efforts are also connected and how we're given a role in the decree. And I think one of the things to remember is that the decree is really the long game in police reform. It lays out this process. It says these things need to be changed. There's deadlines over time. It's very different than taking active protest in the street, and both are important and both are needed. And you can see how this decree is sort of a direct sort of relationship to previous efforts of raising awareness and organizing for folks who are involved in this space long before monitoring team and I were. It is approved and enforced by federal judge Robert Dow. Here's just a quick timeline. I've touched on this a little bit. December 2015, DOJ investigates. They released the results of that in January 2017. Well, there was an election in between then. The new Attorney General Sessions says, I don't like Chicago. We're not doing a lawsuit, whatever. State Attorney General sues in federal court, starts the process for negotiating. March 2018, the coalition, which is a coalition of organizers and folks, as I mentioned, that include Black Lives Matter, ACLU, existing lawsuits, MacArthur Justice Center, collectively entered into an agreement with the Attorney General. So they have a sort of dotted line as parties to the decree, and we communicate with them, report to them, respond to questions from them, just like we do the other parties. In 2018, the RFP for monitoring team, a monitor was put out there. The judge did it, speaking of feedback and input, judge did an amazing thing in October 2018, held in his federal court listening sessions where he invited folks to just sign up and they get 2 minutes talking to him about their experiences with police and how important the decree was. And that added to one of the most powerful aspects of the decree to me is the letter that the judge wrote on top of it, along with it, as he put it into effect, stressing the importance of the changes, but also acknowledging the history of structural racism and impacts on negative impacts on persons of color and communities in Chicago. So March 2019, independent monitor Maggie Hickey, who is with her current firm is Schiff Hardin, and the CNA Institute for Public Research were appointed. I was part of that team that got appointed. So what's in the consent decree? 200 pages, 700 paragraphs, as I've learned to speak in terms, legal terms these days, and not research terms. I don't know, researchers, we think of words, I guess. But Far too much, honestly, for me to really go into in any great detail. But I will point out and highlight it's broken out into these 11 sections, 10 of which are the substantive areas that they have, that the decree has specific changes in policies and practices written out for the police. If you want to read the decree, there is a link to it on our website. I'm going to mention the website several times throughout this process. Um, but you can see there community policing, impartial policing, crisis intervention. So that's how police respond and handle situations when they're dealing with persons in crisis and how they recognize that even. Use of force, which given the context of the moment that we're in, this almost great awakening around structural racism, all really at the impetus of the George Floyd killing. And so that shined a new light, and not that we needed more, but even more, right? A new light on the importance of the use of force policies of police, including that of CPD. Recruitment, hiring, and promotion, training, supervision, officer wellness and support, accountability and transparency, data collection, analysis, and management. That last section is about the process itself. So it's kind of referring back to, you know, how the parties communicate and everything. Who's on the monitoring team? Here's Maggie Hickey. She's the independent monitor. Former federal prosecutor, was the state inspector general. Um, Rodney Monroe, who is the former police chief of Charlotte-Mecklenburg County. I believe that's the police department. Also had experience in Washington, D.C. Um, just amazing brain on and experience on policing issues. James Chip Coldren is the deputy monitor. He's with CNA. Has a ton of experience, both research and monitoring in the public safety space. And James is who reached out to me to invite me and others on the team. So a little bit of hierarchy here. The monitors, quote unquote, monitor and deputy monitors in yellow. There's folks who we refer to as the associate monitors. They're assigned to a specific aspect of the decree. They're in blue. This is, by the way, a little bit out of date. There's a couple names that are not on here that are new, and others who shouldn't be on here anymore, who've moved on. But in the teal there, you see my name and the others who are part of what we refer to as the community engagement team. So we're not necessarily brought in, although some of the folks do, because we have expertise on a particular area of policing. Our role and expertise is around community engagement as it relates to processes like this. But as I talk more about the team, you'll see that there are folks with public safety expertise on the team. What does the monitoring team do? Well, they review plan changes in CPD protocol, procedure, process, everything. Observe in person police working. There's members of the team who do ride-alongs. They go in and observe. They do interviews and meetings with officers and commanders. Um, the monitor herself can be on scene at any police activity and has been on site after a police involved shooting or other things like that. I myself also can be. I have an ID that identifies me as a member of the monitoring team that should give me access to certain situations. Provide outreach to the community and understand whether changes are being made changes that are being made in writing are also felt on the street. That's important, and what I said is distinctive about this monitoring team, I think, versus how things have been done in the past, right? I think changes like this and processes like this in all kinds of contexts have frustrated folks because an agency or an organization will make the change and then have no sense of how that is being felt by the folks who are the constituents or most impacted, supposed to have been most impacted, or lives supposed to have been improved by that change. and then folks get cynical and frustrated. And so there is a real, genuine effort to consider what we're hearing from community in how the monitor judges whether the CPD is in compliance with what's in the decree, and provides input to shape new policy. So when things are new, not me necessarily, but somebody somewhere in the team reviews these new policies before they're put into effect. And then, of course, communicates regularly with the federal judge. Part of that is our regular reports that we are required to produce twice a year um, on our work. Here's the community engagement team members. Uh, Nice young 10-year-old picture of myself. I think I'll keep that on everything forever. David, you might remember me like that with no gray. But Laura McElroy is a communications expert. Sadika Williams is here in Chicago. She's legal counsel for Safer Foundation and also manages their policy work. Elena Quintana, maybe some of you know her. She's with Adler and formerly with Ceasefire as their evaluator and worked at UIC too in the past. Uh, there's me, there's Steve Rickman, who's a community policing expert. Tom Kristoff, who's also here in Chicago, is a research and a public safety expert as well. What do we do? Well, we reach out to Chicago communities. Okay, what does that mean? Well, this is on a slide that a lot of people have contributed to, but it really means just like being available. We sometimes attend meetings, invite ourselves to meetings, ask if we can present at meetings. But we also get invited to as many as we kind of reach out to as well. We convene community events and forums. COVID has really thrown that whole process into kind of a little bit of disarray, but we've had to move things online and are really in the process of just thinking about what it means for us to be online moving forward for a while here. But we had, prior to that, we had been holding in-person community meetings quarterly, figure out how we can engage community members in meaningful ways. So what we do in a meeting matters, be accessible to folks. I mentioned that. And then, sorry, my screen here is blocking my text. Generally, the community engagement team is gathering broad community input and feedback from a range of people. And that gets fed back. What we're hearing gets fed back to all the associate monitors. If we're hearing something about a certain aspect of that police are supposed to be being trained on, that information goes back to the training, the associate monitor for training or whatever. We're really as much a part of the evaluative, what we share is as much a part of the evaluative process as other pieces of information that come through. Examples of policies under review. Like I said, there's just so much in the decree. I wish I could just spend a ton more time just kind of walking through it. But basically, the decree requires changes to all of these. There's some aspects of changes that are supposed to happen with regard to all of these bullets. Right now, CPD's learning how to do community engagement better. That's part of what we're evaluating as we do our own community engagement, because the decree requires CPD to consult with community, and we need to see evidence of that input in any change. And while we're hearing that and watching what CPD is doing, we're also talking and listening to what we're hearing from community about it. So a lot of these policies are under review. There's a CPD website. If you go to the CPD website, they have a page where if these policies are at the point where a new draft is available and they're seeking public input or comment, they're available there. But they've also added and explored new ways to engage people really at the monitors pushing, exploring things like working groups on the different topics as a way to get more robust, broader input and really detailed input, and have conversations about really work through the challenges of how to construct a good and better policy. So that's that list there. And what I would say, since I'm doing this presentation as a kind of public presentation in my role as the monitoring team hat, what I would say at any community meeting, and this is no different, is, if you want to engage with and connect with the monitoring team, how can you do so? Well, we're in the upper right there, the independent monitoring team, through our quarterly meetings on our website, which is cpdmonitoringteam.com. You can, you see our email there. Our general email is contact@cpdmonitoringteam.com. Each of us members has an email address that's just our first dot last name at that same monitoring team address. There's a newsletter, or just invite us. It's not uncommon for myself or one of the other members to be a part of a staff meeting or a board meeting with an organization or a community meeting. We'll just figure out a way to structure that. There's other entities, though, that are in this sphere and related. And so it's important for us to mention that. Obviously, CPD. Please, folks, pay attention to what CPD is doing. Look at what they're saying they're doing and announcing and sharing on their website, and make your own judgments and how that relates to your own experience. And then there's COPA. COPA is distinct from the monitoring team, as is the Office of Inspector General. The monitoring team is limited to the consent decree and monitoring what the provisions of the consent decree. COPA remains the body that reviews complaints and makes judgments on officer discipline. The Office of Inspector General investigates where there may be a crime that happened, right? And does those kind of investigations. By the way, the Office of Inspector General also does its own surveys. Joe Ferguson's office is incredible with its amount of community information, information that it presents back out to the community. And they've actually been a resource and a partner for us in different ways as well. So that, just throw those out there as part of our sphere. If we were doing a traditional meeting, I'm kind of modeling what I would do. This might be a set of these might be a set of questions, an example of set of questions that we would throw out there for discussion. We might do roundtables, we might do different things, but that's just an example. And then we have our own space on the website, as I mentioned, around community involvement at cpdmonitoringteam.com. So that is, just like a super high level on kind of what the decree is about and what our role is about. Me specifically, the decree paragraph 646 requires that the monitoring team should undertake a survey of Chicagoans' perceptions of and experience with police. That survey should include a broad swath of Chicagoans. Then they mention all these they mention all these specific populations. And then later, all these other provisions and details about how it should be, implying it should be scientifically representative and stuff that has implications for our, oh, my slide is running on its own here. This is the version that has gotta stop this, that has my narration. Didn't realize that, but hold on just a moment. Let me come back to you with that just a moment. So what I have here and I'm about to do is just run through, we did the survey, took quite a bit of time actually. We did the survey in the fall of 2019 through February 2020. 2020. And then we produced a report in August based on that. All right, let me see if I have turned that off now. Come back and share. The timings are helpful, though. They would have kept me on schedule. All right. That's what happens when you stick two presentations together. Don't ever do that, folks. If you're lesson to be learned. So the first thing I want to say is, while the decree is massive, the survey is massive. We have a 160 plus page report available on the monitoring team website. And so I'm going to give you just like super duper high highlights, not a ton of money, not a ton of details or even graphics here, really. But the why. Why did we do a survey? Well, I just got into that. The decree requires it. And it mentions including those with most frequent contact. And so that's very important because that affected our methodology in this survey. And the idea of the survey is that it was to set a baseline for comparison of future surveys. So the monitoring team's supposed to do this survey every other year. So this was the first one. And, folks might say, well, don't we kind of already know how people feel about police right now? Well, okay, but we need to document it, right? And we need to say this is officially how folks felt at this time. Because in the future, if CPD is doing its job right and doing everything in the decree, it's designed for us to see improvements, right? And to see improvements in community relations and to see a more positive response from folks over time with regard to their perceptions and experiences with police. A couple very interesting point to mention, though, is that this occurred, as I mentioned, between November 2019 and February 2020, before the pandemic, before the hiring of a new police superintendent, and before the protests that followed the George Floyd killing in May. And that's important because that actually reinforces that the opinions that we have now were not influenced by any of these trends or affected in any way by these current events and are suitable for comparison to future periods of time. The survey design, we did two separate random samples. One was all Chicago. Well, now when I turned off I lost my, okay. The big circle is supposed to be all Chicago residents, random sample of all Chicago residents ages 18 and up. We partnered with University of Chicago's NORC, NORC. They fielded the survey for us and they sent out the survey on an address-based sample. And we had 1,399 folks total. And that's the big sample was 1,053. That was all Chicagoans of all ages and races. In addition to that, because we have limited resources, and because the decree said, including folks who have frequent contact with police, according to CPD's own data, the folks who by far and disproportionately as well have the most frequent contact with police were young Black men, ages 18 to 25. So we did an additional separate random sample of young Black men of 350 young Black men. So both circles answered the same question, 1,053 in the all Chicago one, and 346 of just young Black men. The median time for the survey was 15 minutes. The survey was available online, but you could also call in and respond by phone. Everyone was recruited the same way. So even though I say it's online, if you responded to this, you received a mailer that invited you to participate online. So the recruitment was not done online, just to be clear. So the recruitment was done through very basic traditional random sample household process. Um, we did have, it was available in Spanish as well. We had 26 respondents complete the survey in Spanish. Um, there were a minimum of 79, depending on the question, skip logic and everything, between 79 and up to 96 questions uh, that a respondent could answer, grouped by the following topics: uh, overall police services, effectiveness, community engagement and responsiveness, general trustworthiness and procedural justice, uh, contact with CPD in the past 12 months. It was very important for us to ask folks and understand contextually whether their responses were informed by an actual contact in the past 12 months. And then for those who had contact, we asked them a different set of questions about trustworthiness and procedural justice based on that contact. You know, what happened in that contact? That's where you can get into asking folks about whether there was use of force or how they were treated, if they were being arrested or whatever. Misconduct complaints and investigations, and interactions with members of the Chicago community. That means that last one is, um, we asked folks about how they perceive the police department to treat other groups. How do you think they treat young Black men? How do you think they treat Latino members of the Latinx community? Um, so that's the who. When you we broke down, because we had a ton of data, as you could imagine. The easiest way to present it was by the three largest racial and ethnic groups, because we also were observing a consistent pattern by those ethnic groups, generally with white Chicagoans most positive, followed by Latino Chicagoans, followed by Black Chicagoans. And that was a consistent pattern across nearly all questions. Um, young Black men were most negative, uh, rating CPD more negatively on the questions that were about ratings. You rate CPD on this or that. The young Black men rated CPD more negatively than all Chicagoans. And then Black Chicagoans generally, and you, just to be clear, within the 1,053 all Chicagoan sample, there were Black Chicagoans in that group. Rated, of all ages, rated CPD more negatively than Latino and white Chicagoans across every topic area. Black Chicagoans and young Black men rated CPD had, sorry, I gotta move my video around here, reported experiencing much more involuntary contact with CPD, including stops and force. Young Black men reported being stopped in a car six times more than other groups. And also this alarming statistic of young Black men reported having a CPD officer point a gun at them in the past year at a rate, they had contact, at a rate 20 times more often than white respondents. On average, Chicagoans rated CPD highest on questions in trustworthiness and procedural justice based on contact over the past 12 months at just 55% average positive rating on that, and lowest on questions in the misconduct, complaints, and investigation section at just 26%. CPD received a positive rating by over 50% of Chicagoans on only 20 of the 54 ratings questions. So, of course, this is just kind of how I would close this out in a sort of public meeting, but Chicagoans will continue to have their voices represented by in the consent decree process. We're obviously doing our ongoing community engagement work. We're going to conduct this survey again, and another random sample Chicagoans will have their responses as part of our input. We do recognize that surveys are, and that's, I have like a ton more slides in this presentation on this issue, but I'm gonna stop sharing for a moment, just talk to people, because I'm sure your eyes are glazing over with PowerPoint slides. Um, we do recognize that there are limitations in surveys, and we knew this going into this project. That with all the specificity mentioned in the decree, please make sure you address your understanding input from the LGBTQI community, from persons with disabilities, from young people, from all these groups. Um, Surveys are not really the best way. You're not going to get that full and complete picture. Uh, First of all, because if you wanted to do it as robust as the decree is requiring, you would have to do a massive survey to get your subgroups in enough of your subgroups to be able to reliably do any kind of analysis on those folks. Second of all, we just know it's just hard to reach uh, certain populations. They don't respond to surveys at the same rate as everybody else, and David, Christine, and other folks I've worked with Curl, we struggled and worked our way around this issue in all kinds of projects. How can you be creative and think outside the box in reaching certain populations? So our strategy is we'll be launching what we call kind of special populations studies, where we'll be doing a series of focus groups with different populations. Right now, we're doing one that focuses on male and young male, Black and Latino males in a broader age, slightly broader age than what the supplemental sample did in the survey, to give us a little more context to that group, because even though we did it in the survey, we don't really have quite enough contextually from the survey, but we'll also be doing other populations in short order as a team, and the community engagement team will be doing those focus groups and producing those reports on that topic. So that's the last note on that, and that brings us up to speed, really, up to sort of current times on where we currently are in the monitoring work. Maybe just one other note that if you go to our website, there's a reference to a special report that following the protests in Chicago, end of May, early June. Those protests triggered a provision in the decree by which the monitor can kind of open up an investigation or produce a special report. Really, it's not so much an investigation on any issue related that's in the decree that there appeared to have been that CPD appears to maybe not have been following. And so the coalition members issued a request to the monitor, and she's responding to that request, doing a special report on how officers interacted with protesters during the protest. And so that's kind of actually set us back a little bit with some of the other work, but because we paused to kind of focus on that. But it's been a lot of interviews with folks who and Judge Dow held another open listening session on the same topic about folks who interacted with CPD during those protests. So I'll finally stop there. And hopefully we can listen to each other and not just me. I'm sure you all have a lot of questions, and I'll open it up for discussion.
Thanks, Joe. I of course have so many questions, but I should probably be a good host and allow others to jump in here. So feel free, folks, to unmute yourself, and we'll do our best to kind of keep track of questions.
Hi, Joe. Thank you so much for this. I guess I'll start out with wondering about the origins of the setup. Was this program modeled after something that had occurred somewhere prior, or was this really initiated here?
The consent decree in general, you mean, or how we set ourselves up? Well, yeah,
Really.
Both, yeah. There are a lot of active consent decrees right now out there. So yes, there are a lot of models that to follow. Um, and I think judges have generally have a lot of experience now with kind of what consent decrees should include, but or how they should be structured. But I want to say the Chicago one is unique in its extensiveness. It's just addresses everything. I don't think you see that in there's a consent decree in Portland. There's one in Albuquerque and Baltimore might be wrapped up or near it, but and they're nowhere near as broad in scope. And so yeah, there is that. And then I think the other thing is this maybe speaks to the other side of your question, which is this is unique in that it's broad in scope, but unique in that we've really never had this before in Chicago, right? There have been a lot of, now we're talking about community policing, or now been a lot of efforts before, but nothing that ever had kind of this kind of weight to it. And it shouldn't be easy for CPD to make all these changes and fix these things if they're doing it right. And so I think that part of it is pretty unique. And I don't know. I don't know if there are other models that are as extensive as that. Now, for the monitoring team, I think it's really interesting. I believe that I'm on the monitoring team because of my previous work with the Attorney General's office. Yes, that makes a lot of sense because of the experience, right? It's like, oh, here's a guy who just did this thing, right? Let's have him on the team also as part of the monitoring process. But I think our involvement and the fact that the previous Attorney General I had the wherewithal to think I need this, you know, Len it was very telling. I mean, they built in community engagement into the decree. Um, in a lot of ways. It's community engagement is one of those things that's hard to measure, right? And hard to measure both in terms of counting how much it's happening, but also the quality. Uh, but at least it's in there, right? And so, um, you can say you're paying a little bit more than just lip service to it because it's mentioned. Having us as part of the monitoring team really means now there's going to be a question asked about, you know, did you engage? How did you engage? Maybe where they're observing that engagement. I can tell you, I have observed things that were not up to par, and taken my notes and done that. But I think um, this is both a first of its kind, maybe in its extensiveness, but also follows similar patterns probably in some aspects of its structure.
I actually
Go ahead, Lauren.
thank you. I'm just out of curiosity, what are CPD's attitudes towards your program?
Well, oh boy, I have to be careful, what I say. I think it's you hear commitment at the top. And I think a lot of times when you're talking about changing culture, you that's natural. Uh, I think it still remains to be seen. And I'm part of what we could do or could be involved here is a survey of police. We haven't done that. But how officers perceive the decree. And so, I would just be sort of telling you anecdotally. I don't think we've had an official statement as a monitor about that. But I think just like with a lot of these kind of processes, it even though it's been publicized and everybody kind of knows what's happening, it takes a lot of time for that to permeate down through ranks of any kind of structure, and for the officer on the street to fully understand. Number one, maybe because they've received a training on it, for example, like maybe with around crisis intervention, which by now I believe all officers should have received some training on that. Was working its way through the ranks, um, but you just don't really know. There's 13,000 officers, and we know there was definitely opposition to putting a decree in place that was public. So are there officers still who are not thrilled or not taking it seriously? Probably, you know, but I don't, I can't say that from the role of the officially from the role of the monitor yet. But it is a great question because, right, you hope that if this is going to change, we could talk all day about changing policies and people can change words on paper, right? But it needs to be adopted and committed to in the attitudes of officers. And so for me, just as good as talking to the officers who, sometimes when you ask people their opinions in professional settings, they tell you what they think you need to hear. But just as good is eventually what we're going to hear from the community. You know, are they experiencing officers in a different way, in a way that we can start to measure and see? And are they having a different perception? Because really, it's a two-way street, right? If you treat me more respectfully, okay, now I'm changing how I'm interacting with you and how I perceive you, right? Um, and that's kind of just a basic assumption of interpersonal, right, relationships. So we should start seeing that from the community side. From the officer side, I can't say for sure, really. Yeah.
Thanks, Joe. Natasha, I see you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you for this presentation. It was really helpful to hear. I have family members in the Baltimore area and kind of track their movement in the consent decree. And I'm just curious, there seems to be a little bit of a difference in terms of Baltimore looked at it more as a city approach. And I noticed that District Attorney Mosley was really involved in terms of using the consent decree as a guiding, wand in terms of right-sizing policing. And she was really engaged. And I don't really see that here in Chicago, where it's, the city is under consent decree and seeing more engagement from the other offices. I'm just curious if that's a process gap or is it a different sort of consent, between the two cities?
That's interesting. I think we've had a change in attorney general since, and Madigan knew she wasn't running again, so it wasn't that was an election and the old attorney general was elected out. We just had a new one right here in Illinois, and attorney generals have a lot of leeway, right, in terms of how they kind of take ownership of this, right? And so that's very interesting how you're describing. I guess I hadn't thought about should we have visibility in the Attorney General's office around this? But the city is a party. The city, the decree refers to the city and CPD together. Yes, we know that when we're talking about making a change or some work we're doing, somebody's calling the superintendent's office or whatever. But really behind that is the mayor. And so what we've heard is, the verbal commitments, and nobody's, people are saying they're supportive of it. But I think the political side of being, what that means in terms of getting out in front and communicating about it and having it be a part of something that you are tracking as a mayor. Um, you know, I think Lightfoot has been present. I can say in my experience that she has, um, in terms of cooperating and participating. Um, it sounds like in Baltimore, maybe it's more a daily part of that mayor's like interaction with the community, right? Which is a powerful way to deal with it, and lends it credibility. One thing I can say from my experience in doing community engagement work with public agencies in general, and when we worked with Lisa Madigan's office, it was perfect, is when you have that person at the top, visible, present, um, publicly communicating their commitment to the work, it makes a difference. For those of us who actually have to make the work happen, it gives us credibility, right? You as a citizen, you as a resident, why should you participate in anything, right? If you don't believe that it's going to matter, right? Why should you come to a meeting? Why should you talk to this guy, Dr. Hoereth, who's like got a survey in front of you or whatever, right? Or come to his focus group. Um, but if there's a community meeting and the attorney general herself shows up and says, and this is at a meeting in the evening, a Tuesday night in West Garfield Park, in the basement of a church, and she shows up and she gives the opening remarks. Some folks, she's a celebrity to them, right? And she's also a leader, right? And so it matters. It says, look, she came here, and when she says, I want to hear from you and listen to you, she probably means it, because this doesn't happen every day. Usually she'll send out her people and they talk, right? So what you might have in Baltimore is maybe inspired leader in the AG and in the city, taking that approach to lend that credibility. And as somebody who does community engagement, it makes all the difference in the world, both to our work and to the folks who are present. So I would love to see more of that here in Chicago. Maggie Hickey, the monitor, she's present at our meetings. But you're right, she's not the attorney general, she's not the mayor. So that would definitely help our work.
Thanks, Joe. John Schmidt, I know that you had your hand up earlier, but perhaps the question.
I did.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Hey, John.
Joe, nice to see you. Thank you for being here with us today. I really appreciate your presentation.
Yeah.
I back in the 90s, there was a real flourishing of thinking and acting around community policing. Warren Friedman and Cans and some of the other groups were really active, and it seemed like there was a lot of excitement and a lot of resources committed to it. And I saw that you noted that community policing was one part of the consent decree. And I'm wondering, I think under Emmanuel's administration, I think we lost a lot of resources and a lot of energy for community policing. And so I'm wondering what the conversation is like around community policing, because it's certainly doesn't solve all problems, but I think at least back in the early 90s, people saw that as an opportunity to build better relationships between police and community, and situate police more in communities. Whether or not that's a good idea anymore, I don't know. But just wanted to hear what the conversation is like around community policing with the consent decree that you're having.
Thanks for acknowledging that. I should have I should have mentioned that. Yeah, I think we used to have folks coming to Chicago to study Chicago's community policing, if you can believe it, back in the 90s. And I think the resources is the loss of resources is the big answer to that question. I think there's a lot of times we hear from people in the community and they make reference to some program, and I'll have to go, what is that program? And it was something around in the 90s that was, maybe a really effective community policing program that doesn't exist anymore. And so it's really interesting to I don't know if it would have been interesting to track, like when we had those resources, how measure to some extent the quality of community relationships to where we have those resources now. But the decree does recognize it. Essentially, I'll paraphrase, but it requires CPD to adopt community policing as a community policing philosophy, as an overall philosophy for its policing. And to design strategies with that in mind, and orient how it deploys officers, how it trains them, and everything. So it's a big part of the conversation. It's kind of an overarching thing, but you also have to do the details right. You have to make sure you're maintaining consistent beat meetings, and who participates in those. If your main sort of vehicle for a big part of your vehicle for community policing is communicating, and you're only communicating mostly through beat meetings, which are poorly attended, there's no communication happening, right? People just don't know, right? And we see this in the survey results, that folks don't know even the name of an officer, right, in their community. Except ironically for a little blip among young Black men who seem to know the name of an officer, right? So the only thing you can sort of speculate is a very different context that they know that officer's name, right? And so, short answer, yes, it's in there. Tons of provisions about what should be happening. I don't know where we are on all the various deadlines related to those community policing changes, but it is literally supposed to be the philosophy that CPD is supposed to be putting into place for its policing. But there's so much that has to happen on the ground, honestly and frankly, for that philosophy to be in any way meaningful to the community, other than just a change policy.
I mean, are there any elements of community policing in particular that people are talking about or highlighting, such as better communication or walking patrols or
consistency of beat meetings is one of them. Walking patrols is actually something that that I've heard from the community, and that has been our community policing associate monitor has heard also. I'm not sure to what extent that is required as part of the community policing strategy to be put into effect, but what we are starting to see is CPD doing a lot of these events, where they are sort of convening, kind of pulling together in small activities, people in the community, maybe a block activity or something like that. We're definitely seeing a lot of that. But I don't know the extent to all the various kind of very specific things. If I had Steve Rickman, honestly, our community policing guy here backing me up, he'd just rattle things off for you. But I know that also COVID has had this really just disruptive impact on meetings, and we're tracking things now, and we're trying to figure out if meetings are actually even happening in some cases. But it is supposed to be a big part of what they do. Yeah, and the decree lists out a ton of things. I'm sorry, I just don't have them all on my.
Yeah. Thanks, Joe. I appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
Other questions? Well, Joe, I've got a ton, of course, because
Sure.
I'm kind of a nerd, as you know well. I'm just kind of curious though about the first question I have is about the relationship. You had those four up there, including COPA and the others, the IG's office, etc. I think that's, I think I'm fairly well informed as to how this all works out. That was a helpful slide to confirm what I thought I knew. I guess my question is, what is the relationship? Like, how does that work out? What information is shared between the four? Is any information shared between, like what's the sort of functional relationship between COPA and your team in particular?
Well, we do have a monitor assigned to it. There, it's so interesting. I'm actually looking at an email where I had anticipated this question because I knew it was one. I should have asked also about the community policing. Give me some quick examples I can rattle off. But so I got an email that makes reference to like a whole bunch of paragraph numbers, and I'm like, I don't know what's in those paragraphs. But so there are many changes required to COPA, and there's literally there's a ton of paragraphs. So I think, as you could imagine, there's a natural sort of link up point between, even though we're in very clearly distinctive spheres of activity, there's a natural sort of connective link up between changes that the decree requires to officer supervision and accountability on the police side and kind of what happens in COPA when they evaluate whether an officer violated some policy or should be disciplined.
So does COPA's work, does COPA fall under the auspices of the consent decree?
Yeah.
Because in my mind, I thought of them as separate, wholly separate, and just sort of, is there information, is there some sort of relationship? But if I'm hearing you right, there is some sense in which what COPA does, how COPA functions, is a part of the consent decree, yes?
So one of the things that hasn't happened yet for our team is we have supposed to have a big annual sort of coming together of all the monitors where we hear reports out from everybody. We didn't have that this summer, and we haven't had it yet, but I'm going to be hearing a detailed report from everybody that keeps me kind of current on this. But yes, aspects of COPA, not its necessarily, and I'm trying to be very careful here because there's a different conversation happening in the public about citizen oversight. And right now, COPA is right, technically, officially, the citizen oversight, right? And so that conversation, the decree is not a part of, right? Should we have a different form of citizen oversight? And I think that's a healthy conversation to have in the public. We need that. But as far as the extent to which they come under our auspices, it's only with regard to those specific things that are mentioned in the decree, and they're usually like really specific with regard to like this kind of discipline, or with regard to this kind of issue, or with regard to this kind of complaint, right? And I think that specificity is good. It's probably part of the reason why the decree is so sometimes you read, I used to carry the Constitution around in my bag and amazed at how small a document that was for such an important legal thing. And then you have the decree, which is like the complete opposite, which is like, this paragraph says this very specific thing. And by the way, if you're not an expert on that thing, good luck, understanding that. But the details matter. And so that's the best I can say, David, with regard to those issues. There's a reason why in the matrix that I just got in my email, the paragraphs, there's at least a dozen that are addressing this because that's the approach. Like I said, the decree is the long game, right? It's like chip away at this, chip away at this, chip away at this. But collectively, it adds up to big change.
I think you've made a good distinction. Your mission under the consent decree is not to say, is the form, is this expression that is COPA the correct one or not. That's a separate, as you say, healthy conversation we're having
Mhm.
within the city, within
Right.
our communities. It really does become paragraph 222 and paragraph so and so, really specific oversight of what COPA does. So that's helpful clarification.
I
Christine,
think
I think you have a question.
Yeah, and I couldn't figure out how to raise my hand. So anyway, I thought
there you are.
internally within the police department, do they, do they have a structure for change? Like, is there a czar of change who supposedly is telling people or to doing different things? I'm just saying, and when they have things like training or stuff like that, do they have a research component, and is that supposed to be shared with the monitor in
Mhm.
terms of, who has happened, what people said about the training, yada, yada, yada?
So there was at one point an Office of Reform Management on the mayor's side. One of the things that, as you can imagine, has been tricky is the mayor was appointed. We had just had an election. And then we had a superintendent retire and get fired, an interim superintendent, and a new superintendent. Okay, so I'm laying the context. Meanwhile, we have the decree, which is static, and its work, which is static. So it's the answer to your question is yes, but it has changed. You said, is there a czar, or are there people who are responsible? It has changed, and frankly, that interaction is higher up on the hierarchy than above my pay grade kind of thing. But higher up on the hierarchy than me. Those I've been to some of the meetings and involved them, but it's difficult. It's been we've had these sort of fits and starts where it's like, oh, this person's in this group of people, or the people who we're relating to, and whatever else. Now there's a superintendent. He's made the changes I think that he's going to make, and now we can say the folks who we're interacting with are going to be there for a while. I think pretty confidently. So now it's like whole new kind of relationship building and connecting with them. And so I think there is a recognition that that's needed. Is it quite as clear as like a single public person, a public deputy chief in charge of it? I felt like it was at the beginning. I don't know if that's the same, because I think both people who I think have been in those roles have retired recently. So that part is not clear to me. Yeah, see, here we go. Here's a comment from Natasha about one of the people I had in mind. And I want to just, thank you for pointing out about Barbara West. She was fantastic. I really have been impressed with her and enjoyed working with her, and saw her interacting with the community as well. And it's a loss for this process that she's retiring, for sure.
Other questions?
So, Joe, I saw in the website, and you might have said this earlier, but I didn't hear it. You said it can go for at least 5 years, this consent decree.
Yeah, so the decree specifies that there's a review after 5 years. So that will happen. And at that 5 years, the review is whether this needs to continue or should it be terminated. And I don't think I'm, stretching anything by saying on the schedule that we're on, I don't see how that would be the case. Maybe if things sped up in some way, but the kinds of changes that the decree specifies, I think would be difficult in 5 years anyway, even if everything had been on schedule. I'll just imagine, right? If we're on totally on schedule, just on the perceptions and community relationships side, just how long that takes. And if we did this survey this year, and we have kind of the bad to lukewarm generally kind of perceptions in some categories that we have and other things. How long it might take for that in terms of relationship building and just a whole lot of things to change in terms of how police interact, for those indicators to kind of turn around and be moving in the right direction and then be at an acceptable point, right? And that's just from my little piece of the decree work that is about monitoring. There are all the other sections where CPD may be behind schedule or missed a deadline or hasn't started things yet or whatever. It's the 5 years I think was a good thing to have to sort of check in, but we'll see. It specifies that it doesn't specify that it should be ended after 5 years. Just to be clear, it specifies that there should be a review.
Austin.
I was curious, based on your experience with the monitoring team and the survey results, what your interpretation or opinion on community calls for community control of police, such as the CPAC ordinance, what your interpretation of an alternative approach for oversight, I guess, in a way, what your opinion of that would be, if you think that might be an effective way to address some of these issues, or no?
I think that there's great ideas from the community that come in all places, and I think CPAC, GAPA, there's a third one, can't remember what it is, have valid arguments, about how community should be, what community oversight is, or whatever. So, generally sort of wearing my monitoring team hat, I think there's probably arguments in there that could be a real complement to the work of the monitoring team and the changes that they have there. But some of the changes are really fundamental, right? And if you put some of those changes into effect, really question the extent to which, like, would you need a decree, and because they're talking about a whole different kind of way of orienting police. What does the decree mean then in those kind of situations, if those were to be adopted? And so it's tough for me to give. I'm not trying to weasel out of any kind of answer here, but what I'm trying to envision is, how somebody who's a part of this process, like, comments on that process without saying that, well, if we didn't have the decree, that would be a good idea, or whatever. And so that's the tough part of it. I think, it's like the statement about democracy is only slightly better than, what's the phrase again? Why am I forgetting? I'm just screwing up the quote. I'm begging for David's mercy on this one. He knows it.
It's about
democracy is the worst form of
Is it Churchill who said?
government next to all the others or something?
Right. Yeah. Democracy is better than any of the other solutions, but
Imperfect still.
Yeah.
It's kind of like that, where it's like, okay, we got this thing, and here, this decree is the long game right now. But again, folks who know me and know my background, right, know that maybe in some cases I would be involved in the other conversations that are happening if I weren't a part of the decree. And so I think that the extent to which community control kind of comes into play within the decree, within the context of the changes that we're talking about, um, I I think there are a lot of opportunities within the decree for the police to allow that, and for folks to push for that. And I just don't, I can't comment about the sort of like, well, if you enacted the thing wholly, because if you did, then it's sort of like, well, then we wouldn't need this decree because those changes are so fundamental. Um, we're talking about making sure all police understand community policing, right? Those initiatives are talking about changing who's the boss of the police, right? Changing who directs the decisions around policy, changing who directs the decisions about discipline, and the impact that that would have for the officer on the street, right? Could make the kinds of changes that we're talking about in the decree, null, not even really necessary. So yeah, I guess that's the best way I can answer that question. It was kind of what I was speaking to at the beginning, that um, there are these parallel conversations that have been happening out there that predate the decree. GAPA predated the decree, where folks were recognizing the problems with our police department and trying to come up with their solutions and propose those solutions. They just weren't doing it in the framework, the legal framework of a lawsuit that said, you had to do it this way. Um, and recognizing that those have a ton of value still. Yeah.
I think we have time for one last question. Or one last statement from our esteemed speaker.
Oh, for me?
Yeah. Anything you want to wrap up with?
Yeah, I think that for the context of a conversation with folks at Curl, where we could use your help is anything you've learned today, about the work we're doing, just maybe even sharing our website, staying in contact with me or with others on the team if you know any of the others, or just getting the newsletter every now and then. This is what we need help with. Chicago's a massive city, and they have a community engagement team that has a few people on it. That's great. And sure, I have a network, and Sadaka and Elena have networks, and they're great folks, and they're out there all the time. But anyone who does community work knows it doesn't matter. You need help from other folks to sort of get you out there and get you connected, and just maybe in some cases just help people understand what's happening. So to whatever extent you can do that, it's great. It's helpful. It's been fun to present here and present the work and the research, but it's also part of a call for me to just ask for everyone's help in supporting our work. So thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Joe. This was fascinating. I feel like I need to email you afterwards with a bunch of the questions that I am dying to ask, but know you would have to take some thought to answer, because I know you're in a unique position, right? Like, this isn't just a research project. You're also a part of a bigger process. So thank you for highlighting what work has been going on, what work you're up to, and thanks for the reminder that we have a part to play in sort of spreading that news and being involved. And of course, you know where to find us. And so if there's any way that Curl or anybody else here wants to be involved, just let us know, and we'll try and make connections.
Great. Happy to do that. I will definitely do that.